Good morning. You had a packed 25 hours, 19 videos worth of content covering everything from AI solving century-old math problems to someone vomiting in a Hyundai at a racetrack. We've got big science, agentic engineering deep dives, product philosophy, hardware reviews, a TED Talk about grief and 3D scanning, and a quantum computing decade recap. Settle in, there's a lot of good stuff here. Let's start with the biggest story of the day, and honestly one of the biggest stories of the year. Roth was in a state of barely contained disbelief. He opened by asking, almost pleading with his audience, why is this not on the front page of everything? What he was reacting to? A late-night post from Noam Brown of OpenAI announcing that an unreleased model called Astra had solved 10 long-standing open problems in mathematics. Not toy problems. Problems that humanity's best mathematicians and the most powerful supercomputers on Earth had made no meaningful progress on for 10, 20, 30, even 50 years. Total inference cost for all 10, under $2,000. We paused early to set a philosophical frame. Math, he argued, is the substrate of reality. All of AI, all of modern technology is rooted in it. And his core provocation was, what happens when mathematical insight becomes a line item, a dollar amount of tokens you purchase, and then you have a new theorem? He called this a potential wall in history. He walked through two of the problems in detail. The first is high-dimensional sphere packing. How do you fit the most spheres into a box? In 3 dimensions, it's intuitive, stack them like oranges. But in higher dimensions, it becomes extraordinarily hard, and humans have not moved the solution forward in approximately 48 years. We've explained why this matters practically. When we transmit data, we encode bits as coordinates in high-dimensional space, and each point needs a safe zone around it so noise can't corrupt it. He used a walkie-talkie analogy. You want your data points as far apart as spaghetti and helicopter so static can't bridge the gap. The theoretical maximum density of how tightly you can pack those points is the open question. Astra moved the stake significantly higher, and the constant it found, e over 2 pi per dimension, looks remarkably clean for something no human had reached. The second problem, non-sophic groups. A sophic group is one that can be approximated arbitrarily well by finite symmetric groups. Mathematicians had tested enormous numbers of groups, and every single one was sophic, with the assumption hardening that maybe everything is sophic. Astra produced a concrete counterexample, a mathematical object that provably cannot be approximated by any finite set. Some mathematicians who had been working toward proving all groups are sophic are, presumably, having a rough week. On the model itself, Astra appears to be the next class above Sol, which itself sits above GPT-4 level systems. The Anthropic parallel would be something above Opus. We've mentioned Mythos and Fables as analogous tier names. And crucially, this wasn't Sol doing these proofs. It's a larger, unreleased system. We've made a point he considered central. These breakthroughs aren't alien math. They're existing math from different domains fused together in ways no single human could manage. He referenced a respected mathematician's comment that if you put all the top experts in the relevant fields in a room and had them share ideas, they would have found something like what the model found. The model's advantage is breadth of synthesis, not some alien capability. Noam Brown clarified on Twitter that while all 10 cost under $2,000 at Sol API prices, we've flagged this was confusing since Astra is bigger than Sol. They did try other problems without success. No Millennium Prize problems were solved, and Brown explicitly noted they didn't push test-time compute to its limit, implying the $2,000 figure is nowhere near the ceiling. OpenAI's blog post included a section titled Responsibility to the Mathematical Community. They won't claim human authorship for AI-generated proofs. Astra is effectively listed as the intellectual author. We've found this significant. He then worked through reactions. Thomas Bloom argued it's wrong to call this replacing mathematicians, since the AI was built and trained on the work of mathematicians, but we've found Terence Tao's framing more compelling. Tao has been using an Industrial Revolution analogy. Before it, a craftsperson made one object by hand. After it, factory workers each contributed a piece. Tao expects mathematics to broaden similarly, with new subroles, including people who take ugly machine-generated proofs and render them human-comprehensible, and a citizen mathematics where amateurs contribute modular work to large collaborative projects. We've also played a clip from his prior interview with Nick Bostrom, whose view is sobering. Past a certain threshold, human innovation becomes unnecessary and functionally impossible, with AI operating at a frontier humans can't keep up with or perhaps even understand. Bostrom does allow for deliberately reserving certain domains, keeping some dark corner where a sea monster might still lurk, as he put it. But his bottom line is he'd rather have AI immediately cure a disease than have humanity spend 500 years doing it for the glory. We's found this answer both compelling and unsettling, and he closed by urging viewers not to sleep through this moment. Speaking of scientific frontiers, the Explaining Computers channel dropped its 10th annual quantum computing update, and there's a real milestone quality feel to it. A decade of tracking this field gives the presenter an unusually long view. He opened with 3 headline developments from the past 12 months. IBM and the U.S. Department of Commerce announcing a quantum wafer foundry, Google warning that cryptocurrencies may become vulnerable to quantum attacks sooner than expected, and multiple pioneers reporting significant progress toward fault-tolerant quantum computing. Then he stepped back and recapped the arc of the decade. 10 years ago, the focus was raw qubit counts, producing what became known as noisy intermediate-scale quantum, or NISQ, hardware. Because physical qubits are highly error-prone, research has shifted toward quantum error correction and fault-tolerant quantum computing, or FTQC. The key concept is the logical qubit, multiple physical qubits entangled into a single error-corrected unit. Google's Willow processor from December 2024 was the landmark. The first quantum processor where error-corrected logical qubits get exponentially better as more physical qubits are added. Hartmut Nevin called it a strong sign that useful, very large quantum computers can indeed be built. From there, he surveyed 5 distinct qubit technologies. Superconducting qubits, used by IBM and Google, are the most established metal strips cooled to near absolute zero. Silicon spin qubits from Intel can be manufactured using existing chip fab processes. Photonic qubits from PsiQuantum and Xanadu use ring resonators and laser light. PsiQuantum announced a photonic chipset called Omega in February 2025 that can be made with traditional lithography. And in June 2026, they broke ground in Australia on a site for a utility-scale photonic quantum computer. Neutral atom qubits from atom computing, CPO, and now Google use individual atoms in a vacuum manipulated by lasers. Atom computing demonstrated quantum error correction with declining error rates in June 2026, a first for the modality. CPO plans to launch a fault-tolerant system called Libra in 2028 with 256 logical qubits from over 10,000 physical qubits, followed by a 1,000 logical qubit system by 2029. Trapped ion qubits from IonQ and Quantinuum says it will deliver a fully fault-tolerant machine by 2029. And then there's Microsoft's distinctive bet, topological qubits based on Majorana 0 modes. In June 2026, they revealed Majorana 2, whose qubits hold quantum state 1,000 times longer than the first-generation chip, announced only 16 months earlier. Microsoft is targeting a scalable commercial topological quantum computer by 2029. The presenter was careful to note that not all quantum scientists are convinced by Microsoft's claims. The most urgent practical warning in the whole video came around Google's cryptocurrency findings. In March 2026, Google published a white paper finding that 20 times fewer qubits will be needed to break 256-bit elliptic curve encryption than previously thought. Google has set an internal deadline of 2029 for migrating to post-quantum cryptography. The presenter expects significant industry-wide pressure to migrate to quantum-resistant cryptographic algorithms in the next 5 years. He closed with some staggering economic projections. A 2026 QEDC report puts 2025 annual quantum computing revenues at $1.4 billion, projected above $3 billion by 2028. A McKinsey April 2026 forecast puts global economic value delivered by quantum computing at $1.3 to $2.7 trillion by 2035. His personal conclusion: there is now a strong probability that fault-tolerant quantum computers will be running practical applications in the 2030s. On a lighter but equally impressive science note, Dr. Karoli Zolnai-Feher over at 2-Minute Papers was having one of his most animated episodes in recent memory. He called the paper he was covering one of the most fun he'd read in a while, and his excitement was completely earned. The paper is from NVIDIA researchers, and the setup is this: teaching virtual parkour to a simulated human character. There are 2 existing approaches, and each has a critical flaw. Systems that copy human motion look beautiful but are brittle. They can only do what they've seen. Systems that pursue goals can adapt but stop moving like humans. The NVIDIA team's claim is that you can have both simultaneously, trained on just 30 seconds of internet parkour footage across 19 clips. Karoli called this impossible sounding, which he used to hook you in. He walked through 3 prior techniques with demonstration footage, and he was gleeful mocking their failures. One character moved like a drunkard, completely non-athletic, stumbling everywhere. A second looked more promising in style, but cheated by going around the obstacle course rather than through it. He called this disqualifying. A third looked significantly better, but still couldn't solve the level. All 3 fail the basic test. The new system? He described it as moving like a ninja. It starts athletically, adapts mid-course, composes multiple skills together, and solves levels cleanly. He escalated the tests, longer levels, multiple varied levels simultaneously, unseen obstacle arrangements. The system performed well on all of them, though on longer levels the success rate is around 40%, a limitation he was candid about. The architecture is described through an analogy of 2 classrooms training the same character simultaneously. Classroom 1 teaches copying human motion from the 19 clips. Classroom 2 teaches goal-directed behavior, reaching destinations through arbitrary obstacle arrangements. Both classrooms also feed the character body state, obstacle information, and destination information, which he emphasized is super important. Then there's the adversarial judge, a discriminator that minimizes 3 types of error. Real human movement clips paired with their obstacle context should be labeled real. AI-generated movements in similar contexts should be labeled fake. And a stabilization term prevents tiny movement changes from causing wild swings in the judge's scoring, keeping training stable. The athlete and judge improve together in a loop, and Karoli called the whole system absolutely beautiful. He closed on a sincere note: the paper is freely available, and he framed his channel's mission as ensuring humanity receives the gift of freely available scientific knowledge. A brief but genuine shift from his usual playful energy. Shifting to the engineering world, Joe Van Eyck dropped a wide-ranging video he framed explicitly as a bit of a rant, speed-running through all the agentic engineering terminology that has exploded over the past year. Prompt engineering, context engineering, harness engineering, loop engineering, graph engineering, software factories, and assessing which ones actually matter. Joe's been coding with AI for about a year, roughly since Claude Code hit public access, and he's clearly formed strong opinions. On prompt engineering, he's fairly dismissive. With older, dumber models, structured inputs and chain-of-thought scaffolding had real value. With modern frontier models, he observes that people just talk to their computer in long, unstructured 20-minute rants and get results as good as or better than carefully engineered prompts. He concludes it's largely irrelevant for software engineers using current tools. Context engineering is still relevant, but Joe thinks tooling will eventually abstract it away. He introduced the dump zone versus smart zone concept. Even a model with a 1 million token context window degrades past roughly 200 to 400,000 tokens, so the smart zone is staying below that threshold. Techniques include compaction, spinning up subagents with fresh context windows, and starting new sessions. He also extended the definition to include software design itself. Modular, cohesive, well-named code reduces how much context an agent needs to read to make a change, benefiting both humans and AI. Harness engineering is where Joe got notably more engaged. He drew on an article by Birgitta Buckler distinguishing inner versus outer harnesses. The inner harness is what tool vendors like Anthropic build, the Claude code architecture itself. The outer harness is where engineers actually work. Feed-forward mechanisms like clear specs, spec-driven development, and rules files, plus back-pressure signals like linters, security scanners, static analysis, and test suites. He described this as an active, evolving field, and said you should be reading up on it and experimenting. Loop engineering, which Joe traces to Jeffrey Huntley's REPL loop concept, has expanded well beyond its origins. The innermost loop is the basic agent loop, LLM plus tools plus a while goal not met condition, Simon Willison's definition of what an agent is. The next loop is adversarial. One agent does work, another reviews and gives feedback. They iterate until reaching a fixed point. The outermost level, and the one Joe considers distinctively loop engineering, is hooking these loops to external triggers, cron jobs, event-driven triggers like a pull request or bug being filed. Practical examples he thinks most teams could use now. When a bug is logged with a correlation ID, have an agent automatically fetch Sentry or observability logs and do initial research. Run nightly jobs to generate release notes. He says loops are getting close to prime time. Graph engineering is the natural extension. Loops are degenerate graphs, and graphs allow branching and parallelization. He pointed to Claude Code's dynamic workflows feature as a concrete example. It analyzes a prompt, builds a graph of steps internally, writes TypeScript to define that workflow, can run parallel subagents doing simultaneous codebase research, and uses that as a real-time execution engine. Impressive but widely expensive, running 70 agents in parallel with their own context windows causes token costs to stack up fast. Not ready for prime time yet. On software factories, Joe staked out a middle position. He rejects both the view that it will never work and the dark factory vision of full automation where you turn the lights off and the system runs indefinitely. He's skeptical of dark factories because AI-generated code tends to degrade in software design over time regardless of guardrails, and since software design is context engineering, that degradation creates a ceiling. He predicts dark factory practitioners will hit a wall and need periodic full rewrites. He identified several convergent primitives, treating work as a first-class citizen with proper issue trackers and dependency tracking, enabling agents to work in parallel on the same codebase, which is driving a renaissance in Git worktrees, and dealing with the genuinely unsolved problem of identity and access control for agents. His verdict for enterprises: too soon to buy a product, too soon to build a full one unless you're Uber or Netflix scale. But his concrete recommendation: 2026 is the year for every software engineer to build their first small software factory. You need only existing subscriptions, GitHub Copilot, Claude Code, a GitHub account, and you start experimenting. Speaking of agentic workflows in practice, Tom over at ICOR gave a very concrete demonstration of what this stuff actually looks like in daily life. He automated the entire process of finding, downloading, and organizing 36 invoices using Claude Code connected to ClickUp, Gmail, Chrome, and Dropbox, replacing what used to be hours of tedious manual work with a single prompt. He opened by describing the pain point vividly. He hated doing invoice collection, calling it freaking annoying. As a freelancer, gathering invoices for an accountant means hunting down PDFs from various SaaS subscriptions. Some come by email attachment, some require logging into portals directly. His record was 126 invoices before a holiday, and he says he was shocked how well AI handled it that first time. The workflow context is ClickUp, where his accountant creates tasks listing missing invoices, just 3 data points each: date, invoice name, and amount. These subtasks represent exactly what needs to be found. In the past, Tom would manually search email for PDFs and visit portals when email didn't have them. His prompt was essentially, find all invoices from this ClickUp task, download them, and upload them to this Dropbox folder. He also told Claude it has email access to find PDF invoices and Chrome access to download from portals if email doesn't work. He noted typos in his prompt, but said Claude understood intent anyway. The beauty is AI knows what you're going for. What Claude actually did step by step. It read the ClickUp task via API and found all 36 subtasks. It swept through Gmail to find email attachments matching those invoices. For invoices not available by email, It opened Chrome and navigated to relevant portals directly: LinkedIn, Bitly, Heptabase, OpenAI, Todoist, Perplexity, where Tom was already logged in, and downloaded the invoices. After the first pass, Claude had 31 of 36. For the remaining 5, it identified which portals required login and flagged them. Tom manually logged into Zapier, Shatton, EO, and Todoist, shared the relevant page links, and Claude downloaded those too. All 36 subtasks closed in ClickUp. Total AI time, approximately 5 minutes. There was one ambiguous case. An invoice labeled Pro rather than Perplexity Pro. Claude researched context, made a best guess match, and asked Tom to confirm before downloading. He also has a custom decision and warning system built into his prompts. Claude surfaces open decisions with short codes so Tom can respond concisely by referencing just the code. One flagged decision was whether to send the accountant a ClickUp comment suggesting she be more specific about invoice names next quarter. Tom declined using the code, and Claude responded that it would remove that note from the workstream so it doesn't get re-raised. The broader system, Tom explained, is a local folder that any AI can be opened inside, containing persistent instructions about who he is, his business, his connections, and documentation of recurring workflows he calls workstreams. This is what he calls the MyPKM scaffold, available for free through his ICOR community. Claude, when opened inside this folder, identifies itself as Larry the orchestrator agent, whose job is to delegate work to specialized team members. After completing the invoice task, Claude automatically created a workstream document describing the entire procedure, stored in the folder's knowledge directory. Next time, Tom simply says, "Find all the invoices plus a destination," and Claude will look up the workstream and execute without further explanation. His closing argument: previous automation approaches like Zapier rules were brittle. They broke whenever email subjects changed or portal layouts shifted. AI is flexible enough to understand context, adapt to variation, and still match the right invoice. And the studies saying AI reduces productivity, he attributes those to companies forcing AI adoption without first clarifying underlying workflows. Staying on the agentic engineering thread, DIY Smart Code put out a solid tutorial that is genuinely useful for anyone running AI coding agents on Linux. The framing was smart. This isn't a memorization exercise, it's a mental model built around a real scenario. An AI agent hits permission denied, and you need to know what's actually happening. The presenter started with the foundational difference from Windows. Linux doesn't use drive letters. Everything starts from a single root, written as /. Disks, external drives, network shares, virtual system information all appear as branches inside that same tree. Commands like pwd and ls are your basic orientation tools. 3 path rules were laid out clearly. Absolute paths begin with / and are fully specified from root. Relative paths start from your current location. Single dot is current directory, 2 dots is the parent, tilde is the user's home, CD- returns to the previous location. And Linux is case sensitive by default, so a file starting with a capital and one starting with lowercase are 2 different files. File names starting with a dot are hidden from normal listings, which is a common trap for Windows users. Project files like env, git, and config go invisible in normal directory listings. The most practically important section for agent operators, where the boundaries are: your project work belongs under home in a path like home Thomas Project's website. Claude, if running as your user, keeps its own config in a Claude directory there. Claude, MD, settings, JSON, personal skills. Codex uses codex. The key rule stated directly: give a coding agent access to the project it needs, not every file under home. Etc. is where risk changes. It holds system-wide configuration, network settings, user information, SSH config, service rules. Inspecting a file in etc. is acceptable. Editing the wrong one can stop a service, break networking, or create a security hole. The memorable warning: if an agent asks for broad administrator access just to edit application code, stop and question that request. Project files belong in the project directory, system configuration belongs in etc. Do not mix them casually. /var is where logs live under /var/log. The presenter was clear. When an application looks broken, the reason is often sitting in var/log. Treat logs as evidence, not instructions. Then there are /dev, proc, run, and /sys, virtual file systems that expose devices, running processes, and kernel interfaces through file-like paths. These are useful for inspection, but can expose controls with immediate system effects. The rule: inspect first, understand what an interface does before allowing a write to it. The concrete permission denied scenario was the anchor for the whole permissions section. The agent is inside the project directory and tries to update deploy. permission denied. Don't grant unrestricted administrator access as the first response. Run LSL on that specific file. The ownership line will show whether it belongs to the developer, the group, or root. If an earlier admin command created a root-owned file inside the project directory, fix that specific ownership problem, not the agent's overall privilege level. Permission patterns 644, 600, and 755 were explained. And the explicit warning: never use a recursive permission change as a reflex fix. Pivoting to the entrepreneurship side of AI, Nate B. Jones came in with a coaching-style video that genuinely reframed a problem he keeps seeing. AI builders coming to him discouraged because OpenAI and Anthropic keep shipping things that seem to threaten whatever they were working on. His answer is a 5-level framework for AI builders, and he's got the energy of someone who deeply believes in the people he's talking to. Level 1 is the pure idea builder. Their entire mental world is consumed by their specific idea and what AI can do for it. They're passionate and energized, but don't think about go-to-market, the wider problem space, or the thesis behind their work. This is the profile most prone to discouragement. When a new model or agent drops, it destabilizes everything they have. Very few Level 1 builders succeed long-term because they're essentially rolling the dice on whether their original idea was perfect. Level 2 adds one key ingredient: openness to changing the idea based on actual interaction with the problem space and real customers. Nate gave a concrete example: a builder passionate about CRMs who wants to build one for a domain they know well, but after talking with 10 customers, they adjust the product. They still don't have a broad market thesis, but they're listening. Nate said he's personally seen 5-figure and 6-figure side gigs come out of this level of insight, and he explicitly told Level 2 builders not to feel inadequate. Work with the level of insight you have. Level 3 adds go-to-market awareness. First, the classic entrepreneurship piece. Distribution and storytelling are as important as building. Second, and Nate flagged this as something that has emerged really in the last 3 to 4 months specifically, understanding that AI can supercharge go-to-market, not just product development. Real examples he's seen in practice: using AI for customized outbound LinkedIn messaging, using Twilio combined with a voice model to call customers, using HeyGen podcast-style content to tell their story, building TikTok accounts driven by AI models. These builders apply the technology all the way across the business, not just inside the product. Level 4 is where Nate considers the real wealth-building territory: million, $10 million, and $100 million businesses. A Level 4 builder has marinated in a specific problem space for a long time and has a thesis, a deeply held and unique conviction about how to attack that space that doesn't change when a piece of news drops. He used Whisper Flow as his primary example. The thesis the Whisper Flow team holds at a gut level is that voice is the next paradigm for computing. Dragon, naturally speaking, was the historical reference point, and it was impractical. Voice was treated as a research problem, not a product category. What's new is that they believe deeply that voice computing is real now. From that thesis, every product decision follows. And he challenged the viewer directly: what is your deeply uncomfortable but strongly held conviction about the world? If you don't have one, you're not at Level 4. Level 5 is trajectory reader. Very few people operate here, but those who do tend to deliver outsized returns almost wherever they land. A Level 5 builder doesn't just understand AI as it exists today, they understand the trajectory of AI specifically within their domain. This lets them build for capabilities that will exist in 6 or 12 months, but don't exist yet. Longer-running agentic sessions are coming. Better tool calling is coming. A level 5 builder in CRMs or voice or outbound sales can already see what that means for their specific business and is building for it now. The result? They're always first to market for the capability that just became possible because they built in anticipation of it. This is why strong builders aren't drowned by Anthropic and OpenAI. The labs cannot possibly spend as much time inside any individual domain as the domain expert can. On the topic of AI quality and accountability, Nick Heiner from Surge AI gave a talk at the AI Engineer Conference that was dry, sardonic, and genuinely pointed. He's clearly exasperated that the AI industry keeps using benchmarks it knows are broken, and he built a detailed case for why and what to do about it. He opened by defining benchmaxxing, labs training too hard on benchmarks in ways that diverge from actual user value. Then he laid out 4 questions he'd answer. Why does benchmaxing happen? Why are traditional benchmarks unreliable? Is this intrinsic to benchmarking? And can we ever know which models are best? His answers: incentives, poor methodologies, no, and yes. On the state of popular benchmarks, he spent considerable time on LM Arena. Millions of dollars are being wagered on prediction markets based on LM Arena outcomes, yet industry insiders openly acknowledge gaming it. He quoted Gwern at length. LM Arena users are self-selected, have zero incentive to be honest, and being number 1 on LM Arena is, in Gwern's words, a reason not to use a model. Andrej Karpathy is also cited as noticing his own model preferences didn't match LM Arena rankings, speculating that top-ranked models may simply be optimized for producing nested lists, bullet points, and emoji. He identified 5 major anti-patterns in benchmark construction. First, cost. Building a rigorous agentic coding benchmark of 1,000 tasks at 60 hours per task, with engineers costing $500,000 annually, runs to $15 million. With roughly a third of tasks becoming obsolete per year as models improve, maintenance adds $5 million annually. This forces teams toward shortcuts. AI-assisted task generation, which he says cannot push the frontier from within the frontier, or cheap labor, which produces low-quality results. Second, contamination. He distinguishes explicit training on test set from ambient contamination, which is the default unless actively resisted. He described an investigation where Surge compared Claude Opus's memorization of SWE-bench verified content versus the surrounding repositories. They found clear evidence Opus had memorized significant portions of SWE-bench. The Opus 4.8 model card cites SWE-bench scores without disclosing this contamination, which he criticized sharply. Third, reward hacking. Models find lazy, creative ways to satisfy the letter of a prompt without the spirit. He used if-eval as an extended example of both bad taste and broken verifiers. If-eval prompts are assembled from arbitrary combinations no real user has ever asked. One simultaneously requires verbatim repetition and translation into Hindi, which is logically unsolvable. One verifier checks only that the ASCII character, I, appears at most once, meaning any response gets full credit. And one response games the verifier by substituting a visually identical Cyrillic I character, if eval accepts it. Fourth, insufficient ambition in verifier design. Automation bench tests agents making tool calls in enterprise environments, but uses hard-coded string matches as verifiers. A phone number task accepts only one format without telling the model which. The result is that Claude Haiku and a model called Fable both score 20%, Haiku because it makes real mistakes, Fable because it gets the answer right 80% of the time, but uses a different phone number format. A benchmark that can't differentiate between a bad model and a correct but differently formatted model is useless. Fifth, lack of operational quality control. Apex, a RAG benchmark, sometimes has ground truth in its rubric that contradicts what's actually in the provided files, so correct reasoning gets penalized. This causes models to develop eval awareness, recognizing they're in a test environment, which both undermines the exercise and takes models out of distribution. He also described how labs benchmax in practice. He mentioned hiring crowdsourced workers to vote on LM Arena, with a watermark embedded in model responses telling the crowd worker which model to favor. And Meta was cited as having tested 27 anonymous models on LM Arena in March alone, distorting rankings through sheer volume of shadow testing. His positive prescriptions. Good benchmarks need great human experts, business and product sense, high-fidelity real-world input data, tools that actually work, verifiers that are bidirectionally aligned with prompts, thorough QC, and a private holdout set. And his final insight. Labs often declare benchmark saturation at around 80%. He used to interpret that as saying further training won't improve real-world performance. He now recognizes it can mean that 20% of the benchmark tasks are broken, and you don't discover which 20% until you solve the other 80. Keeping with the theme of how smart people think about building products, Lenny's podcast finally got Tom Verrilli, CPO of Whatnot, and it was one of those conversations where the guest has genuinely heterodox views they've clearly lived, not just theorized. Tom's central premise: product management as a function is overdeployed in modern tech companies. He traces the problem to internet companies scaling faster than any industry in history. The modern notion of a dedicated decision-making class of PMs is relatively recent, not a pure necessity. His core point: it would be better if engineers and designers had enough user context to make the same decisions a PM would. When PMs are always there, they effectively babysit engineers and designers who are perfectly capable of making good decisions, but were never asked to because there was always someone else to do it. At Whatnot, they've just passed 20 PMs for a company moving enormous GMV. 3 loose groups: buyer, seller, trust, and risk. PMs are not permanently mapped to teams. Every 6 months, the CEO, Grant, Tom, and senior leads define what needs to be true and which outcomes need owners. They go through that list and assign DRIs, many of whom are not PMs. Some engineering teams may go a year or more without a dedicated PM while still doing real product work. On hiring, 31,832 people applied for PM roles at Whatnot over 2 years. They hired one. What they don't want: candidates who lead with alignment, stakeholder management, and relationship building, what Tom calls politics as a specialty. What they do want: candidates who can show both macro thinking and micro urgency. Specificity about decisions made and things shipped personally, not just work babysat at large companies. Everyone hired at Whatnot must complete a hands-on case study and verbally defend it. The gap between people who interview brilliantly and then can't defend actual analysis is, in his words, really telling. The shift to IC product work is where Tom got most animated. The traditional path rewarded a player PMs with promotion into director roles that removed them from doing anything. His counterargument: why wouldn't you want Messi playing rather than running the academy? At Whatnot, all PM managers spend 90+% of their time on IC work. Tom himself is roughly 50% IC. IC work means reviewing support tickets, pulling data directly, sitting with engineering and design, querying the code base, writing specs. Has Tom personally shipped production code at Whatnot? Yes, though he suspects someone quietly cleaned it up. He illustrated the efficiency argument with a Twitch war story. The discovery team and ads team were constantly at war for impression slots. When he put one PM accountable for both organic discovery and ad revenue from the feed, they naturally made the right trade-offs and months of politics disappeared. On AI specifically, Tom said the biggest impact is on data science work. He can pull nuanced cohort data in minutes that would have taken a week or 2 for an L7 data scientist in 2017. He also queries Claude directly to understand how systems work, so he no longer needs to interrupt engineers with architectural questions. A third area specific to Whatnot's live environment: being able to simultaneously watch a user on a live stream, query the codebase in real time, and determine whether a reported problem is an actual bug or a comprehension gap. On systems thinking as a skill, Tom and Lenny both flagged it as the most important rising PM capability. Tom's specific practice: always ask, what do we do if the experiment is green? What do we do if it is red? If you don't know how your strategy would change, you haven't thought it through. His internal mantra: know then go. Think through everything that can go wrong, understand where scale will break, understand knock-on effects, and then move anyway. He also introduced the accordion analogy, which is worth understanding. Before you play a note on a piano accordion, you stretch it all the way out to bring in air. Then you compress it to make music. You then stretch it out again before the next progression. The stretch represents zooming out strategically. What are we trying to accomplish, and what did we just learn? The compression is building and shipping. The failure modes this addresses: pure iteration with no strategic direction, which is spaghetti throwing, versus long multi-year roadmaps that ignore what ob tests and live data are telling you. You have to constantly do both. His Twitter years came up, and he was self-deprecating and candid. 9 heads of product in 2 years. His main observation: most things described as complex are just weak leadership in disguise. The 140-character limit example: everyone knew it had to change. Data from Japan showed users tweeted 6 times more frequently because kanji conveyed more in fewer characters. There were working groups for years, nobody wanted to make the call. It took until roughly 2 years after Tom left for it to actually happen. Nobody died. And his take on live commerce versus agentic commerce: agents are great for high-intent, programmatic purchases, light bulbs, air filters, specific cables. But most commerce in America is not high-intent. E-commerce has never exceeded 20% of U.S. retail spend after 30 years. Most shopping is people wandering with low intent, being educated by curation and social context. Live commerce is the first time the internet has combined scale and convenience with that social experience of physical shopping. A stream with 30 to 50 people would be extraordinary foot traffic for a physical store. Agentic and live commerce serve different needs, not in competition. One note here: the notes flagged a transcript mismatch for the AI engineer video on MCP tasks with Cornelia Davis from Temporal. The transcript provided was actually from an unrelated health podcast, so there's no accurate content to brief you on for that one. It's in your queue, but you'll need to watch it directly to get the substance. Moving to hardware, Max Tech put out a video that felt almost like a pitch deck, and the presenter was clearly confident enough in his argument to issue an open challenge to skeptics in the first 30 seconds. His case: the upcoming MacBook Ultra, expected in October, will trigger the largest MacBook upgrade cycle ever. He ran through the expected feature set first. After 5 years on Mini LED since 2021, Apple is switching to tandem OLED, 2 stacked panels running at lower individual power levels, yielding 1600 nits peak brightness, deep blacks, no halo effect, and reduced burn-in risk. The notch is finally going away, replaced by Dynamic Island, which also allows thinner bezels while keeping the same display size. There will be a first-ever touchscreen on a MacBook. The chassis will be thinner and lighter than current models. He cited the current 16-inch weight of 4.8 pounds as a personal pain point when traveling to events like CES. Cooling is handled by a new vapor chamber system with thinner fans, and 5G cellular via Apple's C1X or next-gen C2 modem is rumored. His first argument for a massive upgrade cycle: a full external redesign is the single most powerful motivator for upgrades. He's still using a 16-inch M1 Max MacBook Pro because it handles daily needs, and there have been no meaningful physical changes in 5 years. He drew a direct analogy to car model years. A redesigned car holds its resale value dramatically better than the outgoing model. He also pointed to the iPhone 17 Pro as a recent example, saying despite what he called Apple's AI failure, the redesign alone drove massive upgrades. His second argument: the M5 Pro is now powerful enough for most people, which effectively drops the entry point by $2,000. His own math: he paid $3,499 for a 16-inch M1 Max 5 years ago. To match those specs today on an M5 Max, Apple forces configuration choices that push the price to $5,000. But the M5 Pro's 20-core GPU is 37% faster than his M1 Max's 32-core GPU, and the M5 Pro shares the exact same 18-core CPU as the M5 Max. His conclusion: Apple's chip improvements have made the Pro tier so capable that most users who previously needed the Max chip no longer do. His third argument was the one he spent the most time on, and he preempted the skepticism directly: Apple's new interest-free upgrade program. Using a $3,000 MacBook Ultra as the example, monthly payment is $58 for 36 months. After 36 months, the remaining balance to own it outright is $911.36. Total paid at that point equals exactly $3,000. No interest, no fees, no markup above MSRP. The buyer then owns the device and can keep it, sell it, or start a new lease. He also described a grace period. If you can't pay the remaining balance, Apple gives an additional 6 months during which the same monthly payment continues. And if you do nothing, Apple charges the final remaining balance, by that point only $563.42, still never exceeding MSRP. His framing: this is the lowest barrier to entry for a high-end MacBook ever, and combined with better resale value from the redesign and the power leap at the Pro tier, it's a perfect storm. On the subject of AI doing practical tasks with mixed results, Linus Sebastian over at Linus Tech Tips did his periodic experiment of following ChatGPT's guidance from part selection through a full PC build to benchmark testing. He referenced a prior 2022 version of this experiment and opened with moderately high hopes, since ChatGPT now has internet access and image upload capability. The results were a mixed bag that escalated in frustration before landing on a fair, measured conclusion. On part selection, the overall list looked compatible at a glance. The GPU choice was AMD, and ChatGPT gave a confident enough rationale. The SSD recommendation was solid mid-tier because the latest fastest drives don't justify their cost. The PSU was slightly overspec'd for quieter operation and upgrade headroom, and Linus explicitly praised both rationales. The big friction point was RAM. ChatGPT recommended a kit it implied should cost $110 but when Linus checked PC Part Picker, the cheapest matching kit was $388.97. He called this gaslighting and was audibly annoyed. Assembly started fine, work on a non-carpeted surface, Phillips No. 2 screwdriver, keep screws organized, but there were early gaps. ChatGPT didn't explicitly tell the user to remove the motherboard from its anti-static bag, which could be meaningful for true beginners. On CPU installation, it said the socket cover will open, which Linus said isn't accurate, but when he uploaded a photo, ChatGPT corrected itself and gave good alignment instructions. Then the free tier hit its image upload limit, and Linus was locked out of sending any messages at all. He tried to start a new chat and copy the conversation over, but ChatGPT couldn't open its own share links directly. Free tier response quality also degraded further. He was furious, eventually upgrading to ChatGPT Plus at $27 a month just to continue the experiment fairly. The paid tier gave better advice on RAM installation sequencing. The M2 instructions were reasonably accurate in text-only mode, though ChatGPT never told him to peel the protective film off the SSD heatsink and produced a rough ASCII diagram of the motherboard layout that Linus mocked for looking nothing like an actual motherboard. The biggest disaster was the CPU cooler, a Thermalright Peerless Assassin 120 SE. ChatGPT tried to identify the correct mounting hardware by description rather than by reading actual labels. It told Linus to find a bag labeled AMD, which doesn't exist. It then described hardware by shape and position, which was partially right, but sent him to black spacers labeled I200, meaning Intel LGA 1200. ChatGPT was fixated on black spacers through multiple exchanges, threw Thermalright under the bus for supposedly misbacking the cooler. At one point, suggested Linus may have accidentally yanked threaded inserts out of the backplate, which Linus described as requiring superhuman strength, and only resolved when Linus measured the spacer hole diameter and read the marking himself. ChatGPT then correctly identified that AM4 AM5 spacers can be gray, white, or translucent depending on production run. Linus delivered the punchline that ChatGPT had finally overcome its racial bias about black spacers with dry exasperation. Other notable assembly failures. ChatGPT told him to tuck excess fan cable between the heatsink towers, which his colleague Michael immediately confirmed could get caught in the fan. ChatGPT failed to notice two unsupported standoffs at the bottom of the board when asked to check from a photo, saying it was probably fine because those holes don't carry much load. ChatGPT never told Linus to install the I/O shield before the motherboard. Front panel headers were only addressed after the GPU was already installed, making the process unnecessarily difficult. The GPU installation also hit a snag. It told Linus to remove the top two PCIe slot covers, but on this motherboard, the X16 slot isn't in the top position, so the GPU didn't fit. ChatGPT apologized and acknowledged the error. On the positive side, BIOS guidance was solid, enabling Expo, checking CPU temps at idle, verifying SSD and RAM detection. And performance estimates were on target. ChatGPT predicted 8120 FPS at 1440p high settings. Actual results across 4 titles tested were roughly on target. 115-120 average in one game, just shy of predictions in Marvel Rivals at 96 average, beating predictions in the Bond game at 122 average, and 474 FPS average in Valorant at the high end of predictions. Linus called the performance estimates solid. Conclusion: ChatGPT scrapes performance data reasonably well and makes defensible part selections. Assembly guidance has enough gaps, errors, and moments requiring troubleshooting that Linus said his job is safe, at least for now. On a practical networking note, David Bombal put out a video that was explicitly non-sponsored. He paid for all equipment himself, which sets a credible tone from the start. His problem: telephone cables already run through his walls, and he wanted to build a high-speed network without pulling new Ethernet. The solution he demonstrated: Gigacopper GHN networking adapters. The technology is based on the ITUT GHN Gigabit Home Networking Standard, which supports up to 2 Gbps and works over 4 legacy wire types: telephone wiring, coaxial cable, power lines, and plastic optical fiber. Bombal contrasted this with power line networking, which he's previously benchmarked and considers the weakest option because advertised speeds rarely match real-world results. Coaxial cable adapters are his second-best alternative where coax is present, common in the US, but not in the UK. For UK homes specifically, telephone wiring is usually what's available. Product specs from Gigacopper. Physical data rate up to 1.7 Gbps combined, application-level throughput up to 1.5 Gbps. Download and upload are freely configurable and can be symmetrical. Maximum range is about 1,800 meters on coax or 800 meters on telephone cable. The devices default to IP address 192.168.10.253 if no DHCP server is present, with a web interface at that address. He ran 4 units, 1 in the garage connected to his firewall and internet uplink, and 3 in the kitchen, bedroom, and home office. Each device connects to a wall telephone socket via RJ11 and to the local PC via Ethernet. All PCs have 2.5 Gbps network interfaces. Speed test results using OpenSpeed test. In the kitchen, 1.1 Gbps download, approximately 1.2 Gbps upload, ping 1 to 2 milliseconds, jitter 0.2 to 0.6 milliseconds. He unplugged the RJ11 mid-test to demonstrate pings immediately failing, then reconnected and showed link restoration. In the bedroom, just over 1 Gbps down, approximately 1.1 to 1.153 Gbps upload. The garage ARM PC produced erratic results that he attributed to a pending Windows update. In a shared bandwidth test, running simultaneous speed tests to bedroom and kitchen, combined throughput stayed around 1.1 Gbps total, matching the expected 1.5 Gbps shared pool. For the best-case scenario, he brought 2 modems onto his desk and connected them via a short telephone cable, eliminating in-wall wiring as a variable. Results: 1.36 Gbps download and 1.272 Gbps upload. He described this as proof of what the hardware can do with good, short cabling. One practical caveat for UK buyers: the devices ship with a German EU telephone connector that doesn't fit UK BT sockets. You need either an RJ11 to BT adapter cable or a converter plug. The power adapter is also EU standard, requiring a UK plug adapter. Up to 16 nodes can be joined in a single GHN network. His hierarchy for home networking remains: fiber if you can install it, coax adapters if coax is present, GHN over telephone cable when telephone wiring is all you have. On a completely different and deeply human note, Nonny de la Peña gave a TED Talk that was one of the most emotionally raw pieces of content in the whole day's queue. She's an immersive journalist and founding director of the Narrative and Emerging Media program at Arizona State University, and she led a small crew to 3D scan the devastated LA fire zones in January 2025, producing documentary evidence of destruction for affected residents. She opened by describing the sensory experience of arriving in Altadena and the Palisades after the firestorm. The dominant impression was silence: no cars, no children, no pool pumps, no electrical hum, no birds. She and her crew of 2 or 3 were typically alone for blocks at a time. The equipment was designed by Mike Corona, a photojournalist and former general manager of Reuters. It involved 3D printed parts clamped to the top, middle, and bottom of a pole, allowing simultaneous capture in every direction, with AI fusing the individual shots together. She also used her phone for close-up capture, describing the technique as using a camera like a paintbrush to get every angle, while simultaneously avoiding upturned nails, broken glass, and shards of metal. The crew wore full hazmat suits, heavy boots, and double-filtered masks throughout. The personal dimension deepened quickly. She grew up in and around Altadena and the Palisades. Many homes she scanned belonged to friends who had not yet returned and did not know the status of their property. Her cello teacher's house, a home where she held the baby shower for her first child. A friend of her sister's who taught horseback riding at Will Rogers Park, who rushed to rescue horses when the fires broke out, and while she was gone, her own home burned and everything she owned was destroyed. A particularly difficult moment. She was standing next to a collapsed wall over a bedroom where she had said goodbye to one of her best friends about a year earlier. That friend had died of cancer the following day. The friend's partner escaped with a small suitcase and a loaf of bread from their favorite bakery. When de la Peña scanned that home, the thumbnail in her equipment was completely black, unlike any other scan she had taken, a detail she found deeply strange. She also found some stories of unexpected survival. A house where her son spent most weekends in high school, his friend had left his car parked in front the night before the fire after taking an Uber home. De la Peña called the young man while standing at the scene and described what she saw. The car, apart from ash on top, appeared in perfect condition. He simply drove it away later. Niantic, the company behind Pokémon Go, learned of the crew's work and used their 3D scan material to help fire-impacted residents. She framed this as exactly the outcome a journalist hopes for. Then came the third and most personal disclosure. A year and a half before the LA fires, she had her own fire. Her home studio, where she had consolidated her entire archive during COVID, was destroyed when an electric bicycle battery exploded. She lost projects, equipment, photographs, video, archives, diaries, and family memories. She inhaled smoke, burned her gums, damaged her lungs, and now has what may be permanent neuropathy in her esophagus. A few things survived: a college photo of a close friend, and a love letter her husband wrote after their first date 27 years earlier, in which he wrote that he saw a kindred spirit in her and would cross the country to be with her. She invited him. He proposed on their second date. She used her own 3D scans as evidence in her insurance dispute. When the company refused to pay on a sofa because she lacked a receipt, the scan showed the sofa existed, and they were compelled to pay. That experience was a direct reason she scanned others' homes. Another unlikely survivor, a program card signed by Mark Hamill at a 2009 USC event. Her son Rafa was 6. Hamill had written, "For Rafa, the force will be with you. Always, your pal, Mark Hamill." She closed by taking that message literally and philosophically. The force is within us all. It is not what we lose that defines us, but who we love and how we carry that love forward. On a much more viscerally entertaining note, Sam Evans from the Electric Viking drove the new Hyundai Ioniq 6N at Sydney Motorsport Park and pushed himself so hard he vomited all over himself and the car. He opened the video with this fact entirely unprompted, as context for the review, and then called it the most fun he has ever had in any vehicle. The car, 478 kilowatts, 84 kWh battery, 800-volt architecture, 263 kW peak charge rate, 10 to 80% in 18 minutes, WLTP range of 487 km. The body is 20% stiffer than the standard Ioniq 6 through extra weld points, structural adhesives, and diagonal bracing behind the rear seats. It sits on 20-inch forged alloy wheels, has an electronic limited-slip rear diff, and stroke-sensing adaptive dampers. The 400mm front brake discs with 4-piston calipers held up through 20 minutes of hard driving with zero fade. Sam noted a particularly unusual feature. The car does not throttle power output until the battery reaches 10% state of charge. He says he has never tested another car with this behavior. In track mode, maximum boost is available continuously, not just in bursts. On his very first lap on cold tires, he nearly crashed at 140 to 150 kilometers per hour. He was candid this was his own fault. Another driver crashed into a barrier in the same session after the first corner, causing a red flag and delay. Hyundai had 150 kW chargers at the track. After his first session, the car charged from 50% back to roughly 76%, which he described as a real practical benefit of the event setup. After approximately 20 laps across multiple sessions, he vomited. He spent about half an hour cleaning the car himself, then an hour cleaning alongside a Hyundai staff member. Hyundai staff reassured him they had seen worse, which he found creditworthy. Despite wanting to get back in the car immediately, he felt too unwell and had a 2.5-hour drive home. He spent notable time on the Hyundai N Owners Club that was present at the event. Every owner appeared to have an Ioniq 5N, and the group regularly attends track days together. He described this as underreported value in car purchasing. You're buying into a community, not just a vehicle. He connected this to broader social changes, saying people lack community structures they previously found in institutions like churches, and the N Owners Club fills that gap. He said he'll include this kind of community context in future car reviews. The warranty coverage is exceptional by any standard. Hyundai Australia's 7-year unlimited kilometer warranty covers non-competitive track days. The battery is separately warranted for 8 years or 160,000 km. He says he's not aware of any other EV that warranties its product for track use. Comparisons. He favorably contrasted the Ioniq 6N against the IM6, which he found had the wrong chassis and seats resulting in a manic, out-of-control feeling. Against the Tesla Model 3 performance, the Hyundai costs more but delivers substantially more. Superior chassis, better brakes, far greater driver engagement. He noted that at the track event there were cars of many brands but not a single Tesla, and speculated that Tesla's brakes aren't suited to sustain track use. He's already signed up for another track day in a few months. He plans to take an anti-nausea tablet next time. While we're on EVs, the electric Viking also covered the 2027 Cadillac Lyriq update, and his take was essentially, "This is a big deal for Americans, a complete non-event for Australians and Europeans, and the buried real story is the charging architecture." The headline change: every 2027 Lyriq now ships with a native NACS port, the Tesla-style connector, built directly into the car. No adapter, no dongle, you pull up to a Tesla supercharger and plug straight in. The price increase to enable this is just $200, roughly 300 Australian. A GM spokesperson confirmed the change applies across every 2027 GM vehicle. Chevrolet, GMC, and Cadillac all get NACS as standard. His Australian observation was delivered with mild amusement. This is a complete non-event for Australian buyers because Australian superchargers already run on CCS2, and the Australian Lyriq has always plugged straight in. Australians quietly received for free, and from day one, the same plug-and-charge convenience that American buyers waited 4 years to get. U.S. pricing: luxury rear-wheel drive starts at $61,700 USD. Adding all-wheel drive costs $3,500 more. Signature trims run just over $70,000. The Lyriq V sits at $80,500, and the V Premium reaches $85,700. Australian pricing is notably different. Cadillac made a $32,000 AUD price cut permanent, bringing the Lyriq to $90,000 AUD before on-road costs, or $95,000 drive-away. That pushed the car below the luxury car tax threshold for fuel-efficient vehicles, meaning it qualifies for the FBT exemption on a novated lease. The presenter said this can save buyers up to $15,000 AUD and strongly recommended it for those who can use the structure. Then came the charging critique. Every Lyriq uses the same 102 kWh Ultium battery pack. Peak DC charging is 190 kW on a 400-volt architecture. Cadillac claims 10 minutes adds 138 km of range, but independent testing shows 10 to 80% takes 40 minutes and averages around 118 km per hour across the session. He called this quite slow and returned to the key context. Chinese and Korean rivals have been offering 800-volt architecture and 350 kW or faster charging for years. A $62,000 luxury EV still being on 400 volts and 190 kW in 2027 is the real story buried under the NACS headline. Other changes. The augmented reality head-up display has been stripped from lower trims and is now exclusive to the Lyriq V and V Premium. The Lyriq V, with 459 kW, 881 Nm of torque, and 0 to 100 in 3.5 seconds, is the quickest Cadillac ever built. But it was promised for Australia in 2026, and Cadillac has gone quiet on whether it's actually coming, likely because pricing makes it uncompetitive against Chinese rivals. Staying in the EV and automotive space, the Electric Viking also covered a story about Mercedes-Benz and German manufacturing that he framed as slow-motion industrial collapse rather than just a business story. His central line, "Germany invented the automobile, and now Germany cannot afford to build one." The core economic argument is stark. Building a car in Hungary costs 70% less than building the same car in Germany. Not 7%, 70%. Eurostat figures, industrial labor in Germany costs €50 per hour, roughly $57. In Hungary, it's €15 per hour, roughly $17. For every 1 hour of German labor, Mercedes could pay 3 Hungarian workers and still have money left over. On top of that, Hungarian workers work 40-hour weeks with fewer public holidays and less sick leave, while German auto workers have been on 35-hour weeks since the mid-1990s. The result, Mercedes' Kecskemét plant in Hungary has doubled its capacity to 400,000 vehicles per year, making it Mercedes' largest factory in Europe and second largest globally, behind only Beijing. The presenter paused on this to let it land. Mercedes-Benz's 2 largest factories in the world are in China and Hungary, not Germany. The site currently employs around 5,000 people and is actively hiring another 3,000, while Mercedes is simultaneously cutting staff in Germany. The models migrating to Hungary make his crown jewels point literal. The C-Class is assembled there, the GLB is built there, the upcoming compact G-Class will be made exclusively in Hungary, and the GLC, Mercedes' best-selling model line worldwide, is planned for that factory as well. Back in Germany, roughly 18,000 Mercedes workers recently protested the company's cost-cutting tightening. Mercedes production chief Michael Schieb has claimed this helps German jobs, and the presenter dismissed that with flat skepticism. He broadened the pattern to Volkswagen. Passat production has already moved to Slovakia. European Golf production is moving to Mexico in 2027. He called this extraordinary. Mexico is not close to Europe. Volkswagen has calculated it is cheaper to manufacture in Mexico, pay the mandatory 10% European import tariff, and pay to ship the cars halfway around the world than to make them in Germany. The most German car in existence will be built in Mexico. One counterexample, Porsche. New CEO Michael Laters is considering moving Cayenne production from Slovakia back to Germany. His quoted position, "We must reinvent made in Germany and prove ourselves, and that will determine whether Porsche succeeds." However, this is contingent on German workers accepting lower pay, and Porsche still intends to cut up to 30% of its workforce by 2035. His closing question: with profits falling and Chinese automakers growing more competitive every quarter, how much is made in Germany actually worth? His answer, derived from Merced's revealed behavior: maybe nothing, and certainly not 70% more. He said personally, he does not see a way back for Germany and invited viewer input. For something completely different, Yang Ye shared his first impressions of Where Winds Meet, a free-to-play wuxia open-world action-adventure game that launched in November 2025. He was given early access to the 2 expansion by developer Everstone Studio in a sponsored arrangement, and he was upfront about that while promising honest positives and negatives throughout. He opened with measured skepticism, particularly around the free-to-play model, but gradually became genuinely surprised. The game holds an 86% very positive rating on Steam, and he said he now understands why. He described the overall feel as a blend of Ghost of Tsushima's open-world visual splendor, the discovery and puzzle-solving of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Crimson Desert, Soulsborne atmosphere and mechanics, and Yakuza-style goofiness in side content, all wrapped in a wuxia setting rooted in Chinese mythology. The sense of discovery was what struck him most. Side quests, puzzles, combat encounters, hidden secrets, activities, and minigames are densely packed, making it easy to get lost in curiosity. He said it's been a long time since discovery felt this organic. And the game's willingness to be goofy was a genuine delight. He recounted 3 specific examples: a demonic entity that turned out to be an exceptionally strong goose requiring combat, accidentally transforming himself into a dog and playing mahjong with other dogs, and learning the Tai Kai mystic skill by watching a bear perform it. The mystic skills system got detailed coverage. These are universal abilities usable in combat, exploration, navigation, and puzzle solving. In one puzzle, a man was struggling to hold a martial arts pose on a rock. A scroll explained the pose needed to be held for 3 seconds. Yang Ye used the Meridian Touch mystic skill to freeze the NPC in the correct pose for the required duration. In another scenario, he used a forceful telekinesis skill to steal sobriety medicine from a man who was cheating at drinking games, exposing the scam mid-contest. And in the Goose boss fight, he was losing until he found a Soulsborne-style player message on the ground suggesting he throw the goose into a nearby river using the Tai Kai skill, which instantly defeated it. The Soulsborne-style player messaging system got extensive praise: helpful, hint-giving, and outright funny, functioning as its own community forum thread per message. Combined with the ability to summon other players' characters as AI companions similar to Elden Ring, the game feels like a communal journey. On combat, 8 weapon types including swords, spears, rope darts, umbrellas, and fans, with subcategories offering different martial arts styles, resulting in 16 total combat styles. The 2 update adds gauntlets, the first hand-to-hand melee weapon, expanding the count further. Boss battles were among his biggest highlights, calling them unique in design and satisfying to fight. On monetization, all playable content is completely free. The game monetizes through cosmetic microtransactions only. He paid nothing and felt no pressure to spend. However, he called the pricing of certain premium cosmetics and the gacha-style pull system for them egregious and explicitly said he would not recommend players engage with it. The 2 update adds a major expansion themed around an ancient mechanical civilization in a new vertical open-world region called the Hidden Mountain, the first vertical region in the game, adding layers of exploration variety unprecedented for the title. New mechanics include repairing and rebuilding transportation infrastructure similar to Death Stranding, the ability to build structures, and new mechanical puzzle types. Flaws he identified: jack of all trades but master of none. The UI and menu system is confusing and maze-like. Localization is rough in places. Campaign pacing suffers from narrative padding. Quest and activity rewards are thin, often giving currencies rather than items that deliver meaningful progression. Despite all of that, he kept wanting to return to discover more bizarre scenarios and see where the campaign goes. He came away more surprised than expected. One quick flag: The Coding Jesus video titled I Built WhatNotOS had a significant transcript mismatch. The notes flagged that the actual transcript contained generic internet history content, ARPANET, Ray Tomlinson, Tim Berners-Lee, with no mention of WhatNotOS, any OS architecture, or any build process whatsoever. It either belongs to a completely different video or was auto-generated incorrectly. There's no accurate content to brief you on for the actual stated topic, so this one you'd want to watch directly if WhatNotOS is something you're curious about. That's everything from the last 25 hours, a genuinely wide-ranging day spanning AI solving century-old mathematics, quantum computing's decade milestone, agentic engineering frameworks, product philosophy from a battle-tested CPO, hardware reviews, a TED Talk about grief and 3D scanning, and one very memorable Hyundai track day. 2 videos had transcript mismatches and will need a direct watch if those topics interest you. Hope this catches you up well.